So, I mean, I have some patterns I'm picking up here, some things I want to throw out, but I don't want to disrupt the flow. So this might be a good time to pause and just throw them out before I forget them.
Well, we can pause here because this is where we conclude Erickson and pick up Jung.
Oh, okay, great. Before we go into midlife, before we go over the hill. So a couple of things that are coming up for me as I listen is this feels like an old model. This feels like this is not relevant anymore because, first of all, I don't believe development has been like arrested, but it has been delayed in a way. In other words, I would argue that a lot of people, even in their 20s into their 30s at this point in our world, the people I run into, are still dealing with identity and intimacy issues. Like that didn't get figured out in adolescence. And I think technology, both social and actual technology, have extended adolescence well into our 20s, into young adulthood. I mean, I just took you weren't with us, but I took the kids out to eat the other day to like a chain restaurant. And I noticed the tables were set up, when I was a kid, they were set up with like small family units, like 5 seats around a table. And I was noticing this chain restaurant that used to be set up that way has now long rows for about like 15 to 20 people to gather around like a table. And it's like a high top table for people to have drinks and appetizers and food around this. And I was going, that's an interesting setup. And I realized, they're adjusting to the cultural changes that young adults aren't going out and having children, starting families and doing what quote unquote happened when Erickson was doing his research. They're still in a lot of ways living a very youthful, social connected life. They're not getting married and having children in the same way past generations did. And so groups of 20 somethings are probably, and even 30 somethings are going out together as like 10, 20 people and sharing an evening out. And I'm watching restaurants all of a sudden accommodating this. And I'm realizing culture is shifting very fast and definitively in this way. So it'd be interesting to see how this affects our personality type development because we're not going down these same markers we once did. So immediately I'm going, a lot of young adults are dealing with identity and the intimacy issues. And then they're not necessarily having that generative child experience, which I'm wondering if having children also adds some level of maturity to you, or there's probably some development we go through as people when we have a child and we have to be responsible now for this other human. It's got to do something to our brains and our personalities. It's got to change our wiring. And I mean, it did for me. So I'm assuming it does for other people. So those are just two things that were coming up for me in the midst of this conversation.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I agree. I think that adolescence is being extended. Early adulthood is being extended. I think everything is being extended. In fact, we even talked about this when we did the generational theory podcast, that one of the people who developed that system said that everything is dilating. Like the seasons are dilating. The extension of sort of what they call the saculums are dilating. Everything is stretching out because of effectively the phenomena that you're referring to. The concept of having children as part of your contribution maturing you, I think that there's a lot of people who would push back against that.
Yeah.
They would say, no, having children doesn't mature you. I know tons of terrible parents or immature parents. And I would actually say, I think it matures almost everybody. But what was their starting point?
Yeah.
Right? Like if a person becomes a parent and they're a terrible parent and they're still not very mature as a parent, I think their starting point was pretty far behind. Because parenting requires you to do a bunch of hard things that you just can't get out of.
Well, you put yourself aside, first of all. You can't make yourself the priority. If you've got a screaming child that's helpless, you have to attend to them.
Right.
Not all parents do, but you're supposed to because it can't help itself.
Yeah, the parents who are wildly neglectful, those are the ones that doesn't mature. Yeah. Right? If you're wildly neglectful of your child, then you are not maturing as a parent. But anybody who's paying any attention to their children, they are being forced into maturing. Even if it's slow, even if it's gradual, even if it's just a tiny little bit, they are going to mature from the experience.
We are not saying that you can't mature in similar ways or in other ways. We're just saying that it does mature somebody to have a child. Mm-hmm. But you can also do it through other means.
Yeah, well, the entire last episode was about how personal growth accelerates maturing.
Yeah.
Right. So you can do it through other facets. You can choose personal growth processes or projects or whatever to replicate a similar thing. And usually it's through contribution, right? It's like the one thing that kids do is they make it so that you can't not do it. That's why they mature everybody for the most part. Not everybody, but most people. Even if your starting point was way back here, you're probably going to get at least a couple bumps up. For people who take the job seriously, they go through a massive maturing process because they realize how much they have to step up to have good, to have these children be prepared for the world. And whether or not we agree with other people's parenting, it doesn't mean that they as an individual are not maturing through this process and experience.
Could we say that it always has you reprioritize your priorities? Like it always has you reorganize your priorities in life?
Yeah.
Regardless of whether you rise to those priorities or not, you do have different priorities on your radar.
Yeah.
Even if you're a quote unquote bad parent.
Yeah. And you decentralize your ego. Like it's no longer just you and your ego. Now it's also, you have this little ego replication project.
Yeah.
No, not all parents do that. I sometimes say that the ego likes to hitch a ride with the DNA in our children. That's why they have to experience all the same things I experienced, and they have to have all the same things that I did, right? And it's because you want them to turn into a little replica of you.
Yeah.
And while I think that that's not as mature as allowing your children to have their own, egos form and emerge over time, I still think that simply the decentralization of it onto some other figure is in and of itself going to teach a bunch of lessons.
The process of writing a note on a big piece of paper, handing it to your child, and taking a picture and posting on social media,
right?
As if they're on your ideological train as well, and they're like 3. They're like, yeah, this ideology, whatever it is, your religion, your ideology, anything.
Right. My 7-year-old repeated something I told them. See, even 7-year-olds get it. I'm like, no, they're just parroting whatever you said. Because that's where they're at. But yes, exactly. But even in that situation, I would say that person is more mature than they were before the child was born.
Yeah, by that.
And contribution of any kind requires that of us, because now we are making commitments to the world that we believe we have to follow through with, because contribution is not an afternoon activity, right? I'm not contributing to the world by doing something for a couple hours, right? I'm doing it by committing to something long-term, building something, trying to make something happen in the outside world that I believe is important. And so that level of commitment in and of itself, it's not a screaming child in the middle of the night, but it is a commitment. And I am doing something for others, and I am taking my ego and decentralizing it onto a broader, landscape. So I think that you can do it in other ways as well. But I do think parenting it's the fastest biological hack to getting there.
Well, and in the last episode, I talked about how growth really covers the absence of biological pressures that we used to feel as humans. Just like going to the gym, our ancestors didn't have to go to the gym because they had all sorts of circumstances and situations in their life that built muscle, built tone, built speed, agility, all these things. They had to hunt, gather, all the things they had to do. Same with the personal growth. There were a lot of biological things naturally built into our lives that we now have to synthetically seek out because society will let us off the hook. Society does not have a lot of the same pressure we used to have, or at least our ancestors used to have. So growth is a synthetic kind of connection to those tensions to force us to grow.